2001. I wish I could have been at the one in the National Press Club on May 9th. And you and I talked about how if you could ever dig up that video footage of that event, that would be awesome. Because, like, for one, Sergeant Clifford Stone went way farther in that meeting than he did in front of the National Press Club.
Right, right. Yeah, they all had more time, right.
Yeah, and the vibe was amazing because here we are in this room with people who are either congressmen or their aides, and of course I was not educated enough to know who was who, but I knew there were some heavy players in that room.
Right.
I sat right behind Helen Thomas, who was the doyenne of the Western media, more or less.
Right.
And I mean, you were on fire. The vibe was electric. There were 39 witnesses in the room coming forward, didn't know if they'd even live to see the next day. And they were speaking. They were brave, and it was an amazing. The vibes were just wonderful.
Right, and that sort of continued the process we started in 1995 when we had the first gathering, although it was closed at the Asilomar out there in California where you are,
right.
Near Monterey, and a lot of people don't even know this event happened. The people who filmed it and recorded that meeting stole all the footage. One of the problems we've had, so that everyone knows, is that because I don't know how to operate cameras and audio stuff very well, this has often been outsourced, and then the tapes disappear. And I'm embarrassed to say that this has happened too many times. But the Asilomar meeting in 1995 was an amazing event because we had cosmonauts, we had colonels from the KGB, we had, of course, Edgar Mitchell there, we had many other people who subsequently had passed away. Who were, and it was the first little gathering. It wasn't a great big one like that. I think maybe we had, I don't know, maybe 15 people from the military and intelligence services. And, of course, then 2 years later, we did the briefings for Congress that were closed meetings where we had a dozen or so of these folks, and of course chairman committees, chair people of committees were there from the House and the Senate and the President and Vice President's office, as well as the Pentagon. And it was at that meeting where, some of the folks who had knowledge of the false flag operation, where they would begin to roll out hoaxed information about an alleged alien attack on the planet, were there, who at midnight or after the night before that briefing were spirited away into a secure facility out in Virginia so they couldn't testify that night in front of members of Congress. And I don't know if you even know that story, David, but it was an amazing drama that took place at the Westin Hotel there in Georgetown.
Oh, I have not heard that story. It sounds, that kind of witness sounds like the guy A.H. in your book Disclosure.
No, A.H. and I are still very much in touch. This other person he hasn't vanished. We've stayed in touch, but he essentially was threatened by the people he had worked with in a compartmented operation and told, look, do not talk about this, because he had been on an interagency committee with also some corporate folks where they had planned to use the man-made looking UFOs that Lockheed Martin and my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman, have made that are anti-gravity vehicles, which of course have been fully operational since the 50s, as well as a number of other false flag decoy operations, little things that look like aliens that aren't, that are man-made, et cetera, and so on. And that, this guy was basically saying that when he was on this interagency committee in 1974, that everything was set up so they could hit a button and they could make something that would be 10 times scarier than anything we've ever seen take place, and it would be 100% man-made, but it would convince almost everyone on Earth, including people in the National Military Command Center, that it was some sort of an ET invasion attack. And that they...
How did it make you feel to hear this stuff? I mean...
Well, the first time I heard it, I thought this is... excuse the expression, batshit crazy. I didn't believe it.
Right.
And then I heard it from that guy, and then I heard it from another person who didn't know that guy, and then I heard it from half a dozen others. And, what I discovered over the years is that 90% or more of the information out on the public airwaves, on the History Channel or on the Internet or in movies that deal with the UFO subject, is all concocted scare tactic propaganda that's been trying to build people to go from, the Cold War to terrorism to now asteroids, as Wernher von Braun predicted and Carol Rosin predicted, and now to this sort of this brave new world of there being a threat from the aliens, which of course is just nonsense. But what's interesting is the degree to which this had been planned and thought through over 40 years ago.
Yeah, and movies are advertising. I've often likened it to the idea that if you just are standing there and all of a sudden there's a sword through your chest and you're dying, you don't have time to be scared. You're just like, oh my God. And that's
yeah, that's right. That's the first time I heard this stuff. I actually, to be honest with you, the first time I heard this information, I really didn't believe it, because when I first started out on this subject in 1990, I'd written to folks like Bud Hopkins and others,
right.
And I took everything at face value that those accounts were what they appeared to be, until I had people who came forward. This one man who lived out in Colorado had been, back in the early days before they had perfected these weird robotic-looking things like you see in Stan Romanek's video that I've seen that are man-made. They had this guy had been on one of these anti-grav devices with a chemical warfare agent team that were doing abductions, and he said what we did, and he was a really short guy. He was like 4 feet something, and they did excellent what he called stagecraft to make him look like an E.T. And they would do these things, and he says you wouldn't believe how many people who are in the political and military system and corporate system and other people in the public we've done so that we could move their stories through the UFO investigations abduction subcrowd so that would become the narrative about ETs and UFOs. And he says this was all being done decades ago. And, of course, when I heard that from one guy, these are all very credible military guys, I'm going, oh, come on. The first time I thought, come on. And, one guy said, you can never tell this story, Dr. Greer, because if you do, no one will believe it. And the people who have been at that level of clearance will be killed if they come forward and get named, because it's much more sensitive stuff than Sergeant Stone or others have come forward.
Yeah, and as you know, Stephen, virtually every ET contactee report prior to Betty and Barney Hill, whatever it was, 1962-63, virtually every contact report prior to that time was of human-looking extraterrestrials who were totally benevolent, not Greys.
Of course, yeah. Well, I know the facility where they've been making these things. And,
right. So it's like the technology wasn't available until the 60s, and prior to that time, the only contact reports were the real ones where people were getting the good guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and you're so correct, and it's interesting because we went from the one era into this other, and the turning point, I think, is in the CIA document from 1953, before any of us were born, even me, and I'm about to have my 6th grandchild. Believe it or not, a scary thought to most people. Geez, what a guy to have as a grandfather, huh? But the thing is that in 1953, the agency, the CIA, has a document that I acquired after I briefed the CIA director that talks about I'm quoting, the psychological warfare value of the UFO subject, and in this same document, engaging Disney Studios and other big studios to make cartoons and movies about the subject for their psychological warfare value. Well, that's 60 years ago now, David.
Well, Stephen, as soon as you start saying this stuff, here's what's going to happen for some people. Right now, they're feeling sick, their stomach is dropping, their blood pressure is dropping, they're feeling dizzy.
Oh, I'm
sorry. They're going to start to hate you. They're going to start to hate me. I'm not saying that you should be sorry, but let's acknowledge that there's a percentage of our audience that has what we would call in psychology a dissociative response when they start hearing this stuff, because they can't handle the idea of what you and I both know is called vertical integration, meaning you have corporations, military, government, finance, and media that has a cabal of interlocking directorates.
Absolutely.
But that's how this whole game is played, and people need to understand that entertainment is not random. And I'm sorry if it makes you feel sick and like you don't want to listen anymore and you're feeling really tired, like you have to close your eyes, but that's what they programmed you to do when you start hearing this stuff.
Right, exactly.
You feel anxious, you feel sweaty, you don't like it. You say, well, these guys are crazy. They must be criminals. They can't be telling me the truth. They're doing this just for the money because they can't get into – you have to remake your worldview. I mean, you and I, we've been doing this for so long. You even longer than me because you've been into it since the 90s, early 90s.
Well, no, I had my first contact experience with the ETs when I was about 8 or 9, so that was in 1963 or 4.
Wow.
So, it's been for me about 50 years that I've been involved on some personal level.
Yeah, and I was born in 73 and had UFO dreams ever since I could remember, like 2 years old, so.
Yeah, that's cool because, we can get into that in a minute, in the science of consciousness, which is, I know, a love that you and I both have. And, of course,
sure.
This is a show to talk on it because we're on the World Puja Network where everyone listening understands the science of consciousness, the non-locality of mind, and the omnipresent nature of consciousness. And
kind of a big deal for you and me to speak at the same time. You were the only guy out there that had insiders in the 90s, more than one or two. I mean, there were a couple people who, wrote a book about that colorful UFO sighting, and I forget. But most of the other authors out there really didn't have the real deal insiders. And then you showed up in the mid-90s when I became aware of you on Art Bell, and I said, my God, this guy's got it together. You're briefing acting CIA directors, you're talking to people at very senior levels of government, people, Podesta and the Clinton administration. I hope that's okay to say on the air. Oops.
Sure. No problem.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Podesta went on the record publicly in favor of disclosure, and of course, it's well known that I briefed the CIA director. Although Woolsey subsequently tried to cover up in a clumsy attempt. I always say to people, that it came up recently when I was on the Joe Rogan show a week or two ago, and people say, "Oh, well, that Woolsey put this thing out." I said, "Yes," and I have a letter from his point of contact to me setting up the briefing, and of course, the cover story was a dinner meeting, and they tried to make it like that wasn't the purpose of the meeting at all, when of course it was, and we have the proof of it. And I said, look, you're dealing with Washington and lawyers and politicians, and I know this sounds cynical, but I tell people, how do you know they're lying? Their lips are moving. So I know that's an outrageous thing to say. It just happens to be a true thing to say. But
well, I think people are getting it now.
They are.
It's interesting that I say we colloquially because I was just an admirer of the work back then, but I did show up at your event, and it very much felt like a team and that we were all working for the same goal. We all knew that being in that room could get us killed, and we all took the same risks in some ways. And then you got washed out by September 11th, just a few months later. The momentum for disclosure was building. Everybody was starting. I mean, you had the world's media in that room. I was there. When when Sergeant Clifford Stone broke down in tears describing extraterrestrial crash retrievals, the whole frickin' room leapt to their feet. And these are congressmen, congressional aides. Not one person in the room was a skeptic. And I was there, and I can confirm that. Right. Nobody was sitting there with their arms crossed, shaking their head, going, what a bunch of idiots these people are. I mean, it was electric.
Right, and I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the film Sirius. Oh, by the way, can you come to the premiere? I hope you can make it to the premiere.
I'm planning on it, yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, great, because it's going to be at the LA Live premiere house there, the big one. And unfortunately, the seats we have available now have sold out. But if you have any other special guests, we do have some VIP seats set aside, David, if you have some folks you want to...
Well, we'll just have to grease them up so we can squeeze them in there, I guess.
Yeah, because the place only holds 809 people, apparently. But it's going to be really exciting, and I think that, this is the next step in what we want to do. And but when all this has been building, you look at the amount of evidence. We're building out a new website, SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS Disclosure.com, and you can go there and sign up for information about where we're going to be having various premieres around the world. We're thinking of London, D.C. probably in early May, on and on. But what's fascinating is that in this 2-hour special movie that has been crowdfunded. Thanks to all of you listeners who funded this. It's the largest documentary crowdfunded movie in history, to my knowledge. This has created something that and the aftermath of it, we're going to bring out more and more and more of this information, because what we found is that most people don't know and haven't seen all the testimony and information that we keep collecting every week, because we haven't had a mechanism to bring it out. So after this film comes out, you're going to see that on our website we're going to keep loading up one top secret witness and document and picture and video after another. It's going to be this avalanche. So in a sense, the movie is going to be a portal, if you will, to an enormous amount of material and information that most people can't even imagine.
Well, and as I'm sure you already have heard, Stephen, this is something I heard from insiders recently. I won't say how much, but I will say that the Obama administration is planning on aggressively cutting back military spending by a significant percentage. And when they do that, the big fear in the insider community is that as soon as these guys who they've been working with on SEC or SCI, sensitive compartmented information clearances, sometimes 35 levels above the president, as soon as these guys don't have a job, they're going to sing like songbirds.
Well, and that's the other thing, is that we want to create a mechanism through this site for people to come forward as whistleblowers, because we know, I mean, I meet with, for every person that people can see at SeriousDisclosure.com, and you can see already the links there to the disclosure witnesses and all the information we have, there are at least 5 for every one that we've identified that hasn't been willing to come forward with name, rank, and serial number. Now, remember, the event that David's told all you listeners, those folks stood up, name, rank, serial number, and had signed a document saying that they would testify under oath under the penalty of perjury, federal perjury, to everything they were saying at the National Press Club event, which is a requirement I placed. If someone would not sign that document, I would not let them stand up in front of those members of Congress or the world media, because I felt that people had to not only have corroboration to their accounts and possible documents, like the folks from the Strategic Air Command and the Minot, North Dakota case, the case in the Rendlesham Forest case, but we also wanted that what they would be saying, they would be willing to testify under oath under penalties of federal perjury, which are very strict. So we set it up that way on purpose, and it wasn't to be draconian at all to the witnesses. It was to establish a very high bar that we had to have so that people understood this was extremely serious, because people were basically coming forward, as you pointed out, and exposing a large, what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex that had gotten into such levels of secrecy that it had become illegal. And the illegal secrecy was in the process, or has been in the process, of destroying our planet by suppressing not only the information that were all related to these beings from other star systems. And I think we're about to get some genetic evidence of that, but I don't want to tip my hand too far. But the other part of it is that the technologies behind these UFO devices, even the man-made ones, are such amazing science. And here we are burning coal for half of our electricity as if we were in 1880s. I mean, it's just
a bad joke.
It's just ridiculous. And, I mean, imagine how we must be regarded by these other civilizations, because, as Kaku says, we're not even a level 1 society yet. We're still here squabbling over resources, and we're going to build this Keystone pipeline bringing the tar sands out of Canada into the States, when we haven't needed fossil fuels since 1908, when Tesla with Stubblefield had their Earth battery generator running his farm.
Yeah, I wrote a New York Times bestseller book in 2011 called Sourcefield Investigations, and one of the things I quote in there is that the Federation of American Scientists showed that there were over 5,000 patents classified. You gave me that data, and I asked you if I could use it in the book.
Sure. 5,000
patents of energy devices classified by the U.S. government, including anything that's over 20% efficient at converting energy.
Correct.
So you're automatically going to be attacked, bought out, threatened, or otherwise stopped if you invent anything that works better than coal, oil, or gas.
But, that's the whole divide and conquer thing, David, that we're trying to overcome with the film Sirius, because what we want to do with this is that we have been resisting. We've had some very big distribution companies approach us. I won't say who. We're saying no at this point. Here's what I think needs to happen. Everyone listen up, sit up right now. A year ago, I was at a conference with about 1,000 people, and I announced the concept of doing this film. I said, but I think we need to make it so that every man, woman, and child on Earth becomes a distributor. And we're signing up with a online video on demand service so that you, for example, can host and send out that movie and send it out virally. And the people who view it, there'll be some nominal charge to see it. You'll get a percentage of that for your everyone listening. Same thing for everyone on this call listening. Everyone can be an affiliate because it's this super program. It's this amazing program that'll let everyone. So if through your network 100,000 people saw it, you'd probably be able to have $100,000 to advance your research. If the Noetic Sciences people did it and had 100,000 people, the idea is that we want to create this viral juggernaut that puts it out there, but then all the proceeds that come to the company that has done the crowdfunding, Sirius Technology and Research. All of those funds are going to go into our energy fund to build our own lab. Why? Because we need to outfit a facility where we put these geniuses. You know some of them, David. I know quite a few of them who have been in this divide and conquer world of secrecy and compartmentalization, where we put them under one roof and we live stream what's going on in that lab. None of it is secret. It's open source. And we get these technologies built up. And with the information I'm sitting on, I think that in less than a year, we would have a version 1.0 device that would take us out of fossil fuels. At the most 2 years. I think probably under a year. Because I have people who have handed off thousands of pages of the kind of stuff you're referring to in this Federation of American Sciences document that talks about the 5,135 patents that have been sequestered and kept secret. So what we need to do is understand is that if we can make this film go viral and push it through the system without big corporations buying it up and black shelving it, that we'll be able to raise the funds in a few months to get this whole energy thing done properly. Because, the problem is we tried with the Orion project to do that. We raised enough money it wouldn't even have bought the equipment for the lab, unfortunately. I'm hoping this film will create enough awareness as a major motion picture documentary release to create enough revenue so that this laboratory and research facility, staffed with the best engineers, electrical engineers, physicists, materials management people, project management, will be able to stand up this year and begin to build out these systems, because we know a lot of people have them, but the ones who tried to do it the way you were suggesting, one lab at a time, one secret facility at a time, in their garage one at a time, those guys get picked off. They're either slapped with a national security order, which is what is called an NSO, their patents are seized, or they have, thugs that come in and threaten them. Or if that doesn't happen, they're simply bought out by a large corporation, and the technology is put on a black shelf. I know a man who's a United Airlines pilot, the 747, who grew up with an inventor who used to invent this kind of stuff, and it was, the big motor companies and oil companies would buy up his device and put it on a black shelf. He'd invent another one. He retired doing this. Well, of course, he made a lot of money, but it never got out to benefit Gaia and humanity. We've got to break this cycle where it's all about, inventor greed and the secrecy that you see in Silicon Valley and these high-tech centers. So our whole vision for what the film Sirius is going to do is to create the resources so that we can do this very openly and bring these technologies out with a strategy that avoids the pitfalls of the last 100 years where it's been this divide and conquer. And, that's what we did with Disclosure Project. If you look at all these top secret military and government witnesses, we didn't dribble them out. We had them come out all at once. Why? There's safety in numbers, there's credibility in numbers, and it creates a zeitgeist, a force that changes. And that's what we need to do with this energy effort, because the world is running out of time and we've got to fix it.
Let me ask you this question, because I read most of the comments that people write, and as you know, they can be very sardonic and cynical.
Oh, yeah, everyone's always cynical.
Everybody's going to say, okay, Mr. Greer, Dr. Greer, if they can call you doctor, they probably can't stoop to that. But you are a medical doctor. You have a credible academic background. You've been doing this for many, many years, and they're going to say, how could he possibly be involved in this stuff and not have been compromised? If you're talking about threats, if you're talking about people showing up with guns or threatening you or buying you out, how could you not have been bought out, threatened, or otherwise? And, of course, I don't know the answer because I'm on the outside. I've watched your work. You were gracious enough to invite me to speak for the movie, but I haven't even seen the movie at all, so I'm looking forward to it as much as everybody else. But how did you avoid the pitfalls of doing this and all the different ways that people would try to compromise you?
Well, first of all, we didn't avoid it. I mean, I've been threatened. I had 3 people on my team killed, as all of you know who've read my autobiography, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which you can get at SeriousDisclosure.com. Back in 1992, a very senior military official who had been the head of Army intelligence offered me personally $2 billion if I would shut up and fold this operation and join him. I told him no, that I'm not for sale, and then he went to my wife and tried to cajole her into convincing me to do this. So the reality is all the things you've mentioned have been offered or threatened. I just haven't taken the bait because I think I have my own moral compass. I don't consider myself a perfect person by any means, and anyone who spends any time with me knows I can be rather irreverent and profane and outrageous. However, I have my own moral compass, and when I was 17 years old, I had a near-death experience, and I had this divine consciousness, cosmic consciousness experience, so that I know there is no death. I also know that our conscious life being within our physical body goes on forever. And while I'm not religious, I have a very spiritual center, so that when I'm threatened, that's what I am anchored in, or when I'm offered a buyout, that's where I'm anchored in, because our time on this planet is really a very short period. And so I take that long view on this, and I think that is the only thing that ultimately is going to see you through the matrix, if you want to call it that, of threats and inducements and briberies and what have you. I've been offered a great many of those things. I was offered a CEO position, for example, from a very senior guy at the CIA who was setting up a corporation to deal with this issue, and I said, no, thank you. And this was in the last couple of years. So I
would have had the golden parachute if you'd taken a job like that, I assume.
Oh, of course, and an unlimited source of funding and access and what have you. I've never taken the bait. Now, of course...
So you could have been involved in the UFO backstory and be in the classified world if you'd taken these invitations.
Yeah, since 1992.
Wow.
And I've always said, no, thank you, because, A, I don't need to do that, and because I already have my sources and methods, and number 2, I'm never going to sell out like that. And anyone who knows me well knows that's the case. I mean, after all, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. In the last few years, leaving my medical career and moving into this, my wife and I and our family have foregone a little over $6 million in income personally to pursue this with virtually no income. I mean, the most we've made has been between 10 and 30% of what we normally would in a year, and thank goodness I made some halfway decent investments, when I was still working full-time as a medical doctor. But most people wouldn't put up with this, and I have to say, most doctors' wives wouldn't. My wife is an absolute saint and amazing person, anyone who meets her. And I think that, the problem is that what you're describing is what has happened. I'll give you an example. Less than 3 years ago, we had a man under contract who knows how to build up these energy systems, and we had raised some funds through the Orion Project, which is an informational project, and people had given some funds, and this guy was working on one of these devices based on a lot of the Tesla work that he had done in his classified lab. His immediate intelligence handlers said, you may do this, just don't touch the propulsion systems, the things that make things fly and disappear into transdimensional space, because he's worked on those also. So he received this grant from us, and he was working on it, down to his skiff, which is a secure communication intelligence facility there near Huntsville, Alabama, near the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Redstone Arsenal, comes a former CIA director with a bunch of goons who threatened him. Now, this is in the last 3 years. This is not ancient history. And basically threatened him, his wife, and his career if he doesn't drop us and drop this. And so here was it. We try. So when people say, "Why don't you try just getting some people and putting some seed money out there?" and I said, "We've tried that. It doesn't work. We've got to do this with something where the whole world's watching, with a group of people in a lab, and the media is watching, and millions of people and eyeballs are on this project. And that's what we hope to do through Sirius. But in that case, and here was my heartbreak, is that this man was threatened. He put his tail between his legs and ran. Now, I'm telling you right now, and that the only measure of anything that matters on this subject is moral courage. And I'm so sick of hearing the morality of what passes as morality in this country. You know, I could care less about, the stain on Monica Lewinsky's dress. What I'm concerned about, frankly, is the morality of people dropping humanity and the needs of the earth because they are personally threatened or they are personally offered a buyout. And David, that's what's happened for 100 years. We have got to figure out a way to rise to a higher state of consciousness of no fear, and the fearlessness comes from a spiritual state. As Krishna said to Arjuna on the battlefield, a little of this, with a capital T, eliminates all fear. And it's that state of divine consciousness. And that's what we have to kind of move and operate through to withstand the sort of threats and inducements and temptations that the intelligence community and the corporate world and secret government programs are extremely good at doing. But unfortunately, when you have a lot of these people working by themselves, and it's an engineer somewhere or a physicist somewhere, they get terrified and they run. And I think that this has been the most difficult thing we've ever tried to do. Disclosure Project was difficult. Doing the work we do with contact with the ETs, that's a joy, although we've had a lot of interference. But bringing out these technologies, David, because you're making a run, as you know, at the petrodollar banking macroeconomic power system. And that's really what's running the planet. It isn't 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I've got news for folks. Not the White House and the Congress. That's sort of a sideshow. It's these large cartels and economic interests, and no less a person confirmed this to me than the Minister of Defense of Canada, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, and I was at his home a few years ago before we did a press conference together, and he went into great detail about how the gangbanksters and the sort of the cartels in the banking and central bank system had a grip on global power, and that the governments of the world pretty much danced to their tunes like a puppet.
More and more people are becoming aware of that now, and we are moving into an era in which, and this is a very important point for everybody to be aware of, the Big Brother thing is a myth. Granted, yes, the insiders that you mentioned have been threatened, but there are so many paranoid fear porn junkies on the internet who think that if they even type in a Google search that they're going to get a knock on the door in the morning.
Yeah, well,
not true.
Well, I tell people, no, it's not true. I think it's only when you're getting close to really making a big change. And I always tell people, if this little birdie is still singing at the mine, I'm the canary in the mine shaft, and if I'm still alive, don't worry about it. But I think that the other point is that we do have good people helping protect us, but also we have a lot of people praying for our protection, which I welcome from the World Puja crowd because they're very conscious people, and I believe in the power of meditation and prayer. But I think on top of it, you have a lot of folks, and this is something I don't talk about that often, but there are a lot of folks in the covert world who want to see this happen. but they're afraid of sticking their necks out too far. They'll end up like Bill Colby, who was killed trying to help us, as you know.
Yeah.
Now, people don't know the story. There was a CIA director, Bill Colby, who back some years ago, right before he died, was going to meet with a member of my board of directors and hand off one of these free energy, for lack of a better word, energy generation devices and some seed funding so we could quickly get it out to the world. This is, I think, in the mid-'90s. And the week he was going to meet with us, he was found floating down the Potomac River. It was quite obvious. Even his wife went on CNN and said, look, we don't know why he would have gone out on the river allegedly canoeing in a rain-swollen, flooded river leave the house open, the coffee maker on, the computer on. It's very, very suspicious, and yet it never really got investigated. Recently, his son wrote a book thinking that maybe he'd gone and committed suicide, but it was none of the above. A colonel who was best friends with CIA Director Bill Colby told us personally that he was in fact killed because he was going off the reservation and leaving the so-called majestic cabal behind to help do this. And so that became a shot across the bow during, of course, the Clinton administration that frightened off a lot of folks. But
that son of his wrote that book, which also is a documentary, and I don't remember the title of it, but you can look it up on iTunes and watch it. It's really pretty darn good, and it gives you a lot of backstory that establishes Colby. Colby was, just for people who don't know, I didn't know this till I watched the documentary, he was essentially the main fall guy who took the secrets of the CIA and exposed them post-Watergate, post-Vietnam, and basically was the guy who had to, apologize to the world and insisted that this was the only way we were going to move forward was to tell the truth.
Right.
And that's the most poignant part of the documentary, because you're seeing how this one man essentially embodied the secrecy of America and said, now is the time to tell the truth. And there's a strong leitmotif in the movie, subconsciously I felt it, that he was ready to do that cycle again on a much bigger level with you.
That's what he was doing. And
the filmmaker didn't do that in the film, but that's what I saw as soon as I watched it.
Well, the filmmaker and the son and the family don't know what I'm talking about right now on this interview. And what I'm telling you is that, after my assistant, Sherry Adamak, died mysteriously, and there were 3 of us that got aggressive metastatic cancers the same month. And everyone died but me. I was the only one that lived. I was supposed to die first, as you know.
Did you do hardcore juicing and a nutritional intervention? All that
I did everything. Prayer, meditation, conventional medical, and everything you can think of. And so here I am. I'm still alive and free of it as far as anyone can tell. However, when the CIA director wanted to do this, his best friend, who was a retired colonel, told us that, at this point, this was 20 years after he had done all this stuff with the CIA secrets and stuff after Watergate and what have you, and Vietnam, and he felt it was just a crime that all of this UFO information and these sciences and technologies were being withheld from the planet, because he saw how much poverty and suffering and environmental degradation, and that it was all easily fixable. And he knew it. And so he was getting up in years. He certainly knew. I mean, the colonel who came to Sherry Adamak's, my assistant who died, at her wake. I was there by her bedside when she passed away, and then we had a funeral and a wake, and this mysterious man shows up. And he was ushered in by someone that I know, I'm not going to name, who's worked with me for 20-some years. And it was this colonel who had been best friends with Colby, who had died not long before this had happened to us. And he said, look, the colonel said, we both have had terrible losses, but we can't look back. We just have to keep going forward. Wow. Now, I have to admit, I was very depressed for a couple of years, and it was very difficult. So, this has not been a cakewalk by any means. I don't mean to make people think it has been. But ultimately, you keep returning to your spiritual roots and the consciousness and the vision of, what kind of world could we have if the truth were known, if these science and technologies, if these patents were released, if it was known that we're all children of this fabulous conscious universe, and that we have brother and sister planets out there that are populated with higher intelligent life forms. I mean, it is such a huge change in our society. And, of course, it's such a large change that it threatens the power structure, both religious and economic and technological and political and geopolitical.
Just to show you how widespread this stuff is, I had a housemate who I used to live with in the house before I now rented myself, but he had a friend of the family. His family, I won't say what it was, but he was part of a major technology company in the 80s. It made a lot of money.
Right.
His father was like the VP of something or other in the company. And they knew this guy who had a defense job. And he just told me this one day because he wasn't even really into UFOs, and I started telling him this stuff, and he wanted to change the subject really quickly.
Right.
Because that's what most people do. They get really uncomfortable. But before he changed the subject, he said that they knew this guy from the defense industries, and on his deathbed, the last thing he said was, if you really want to know something interesting, I can tell you this with absolute confidence. Every form of technology you have ever seen in a science fiction movie, we already have it and we're already using it.
Correct.
And this is just a guy who didn't even believe most of the stuff I told him, and this was just some little story from his own private file.
Right.
And I've never even told that story publicly before, but the point is there's lots and lots of little bits and pieces of information out there. And what guys like you and me have been doing independently and sometimes collaboratively is pulling it all together and showing people, hey, look, you start connecting the dots, and yes, you're going to see that there's a cabal. You're going to see that there's a secrecy. You're going to see that the world that the media is presenting to you is not the world. We live in Star Trek. We're already a Star Trek planet. We just haven't been told that yet.
Well, you know, it's interesting because one of the things that a Lockheed Skunk Works man said to our team once was, anything you can imagine, they've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. So, and those of you who don't know, the Skunk Works are the super secret compartmented operations that Lockheed has, and one of the compartmented operations has dealt with ET technologies and also anti-gravity, so-called gravity control technologies up there near Palmdale and Lancaster and Edwards complex facilities, and also the ones out in other regions out in Utah and Nevada. But the point is that, you know, it goes way beyond. And one of the things that several of these military witnesses have told me have said that if you told people the truth, it would discredit you because the truth is more bizarre than any of the science fiction that's out there. And it really hides itself. They said it really is a self-concealing thing because we're more than 50 years into the public being miseducated and brainwashed about science, technology, religion, consciousness, education, you name it. And what's happened is that the truth is much more bizarre than any fiction, and therefore it is self-discrediting according to the metric of the mainstream media and mainstream academia. So it's really through the looking glass, and this is, you know, what you said a little while ago is so true, that it's really a paradigm shift of reordering one's entire worldview.
Well, think about the fact that when you go to school and you get a grade on a paper, you're basically told that the accuracy of your knowledge determines your value as a person.
Right.
If you don't have accurate knowledge in your mind, then you get an F grade, which means that you are a failure.
Right.
And then people have been conditioned through psyops that if they believe things that are not true, they will suffer social ostracism from their peers. And we have a strong connection to the animal kingdom in which if you break off from the group, you're probably not going to live very long.
Correct.
You need to conform in order to survive. And so we have that
right.
We have that deep animal conditioning that says that if we possess incorrect knowledge, that we're a failure and that we're therefore at risk.
Right.
And that also goes over into the employment world. You know, as soon as you get out of the conditioning of school, you graduate directly into employment in which you're on a job site, and you have to make sure that your knowledge is correct and that you conform to what the management wants you to do.
Right.
And more people now, thanks to the Internet, are able to work for themselves and break out of that endless chain of backstabbing and butt-kissing.
Right, right. Well, this is actually, one of our Air Force witnesses, George Filer, who actually has gone to start a site where he compiles a lot of cases, and he's an Air Force guy who was present when the ET was shot and killed on the tarmac there near McGuire Air Force Base, and back some years ago. And he's one of the Disclosure Project witnesses, and he had said to me years ago in an interview that through the force of ridicule and the use of the media and movies and everything to ridicule and create a social opprobrium around the subject, a sort of a distasteful thing that people won't talk about this issue because of the fear of ridicule and rejection, as you're talking about, from their peerage, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a scientist or a professor or whatever. And interestingly, that's why it's so important to have credentialed people, credible people come forward with information, data, documents, and what have you, who say, look, yes, this subject has been the butt of a lot of jokes and a lot of comedy, and there is a lot of nonsense in this field. However, these facts are true. And that's what we've tried to do with Disclosure, and it's what we've done with all of these subjects. But it is, we are obviously up against this propaganda machine that got rolled out before I was born and before you were born. So there's a conditioning out there, but I believe that has changed because, when we started this effort, about a third of the Majestic group, just so you know, the so-called cabal, were in favor of what I was recommending to President Clinton and the CIA director I met with. Now I understand it's more like two-thirds, although they're still very intimidated by the ruthless far end of it. About 30% of the public thought that ET life existed and UFOs were real. Now it's in the 50 to 60% range. And in fact, 43% in a recent poll that just came out 2 months ago of the public think that they're here frequently on the Earth, not just that they exist in space or may have visited the Earth. So the point I'm making is that there has been a huge shift on this, and yet within, quote, polite circles and academic circles in the mainstream media, this is still very much the giggle factor stepchild of news, and that's something that is going to need to change, and we hope to see that it changes further, but ultimately it changes by one person at a time coming out, speaking their truth, sharing the information, and then pointing to people to the credible evidence, documents, videos, photos of ET craft, top secret guys coming forward. Because I know that when I was on the Joe Rogan show, he didn't know, a lot of his listeners didn't know that we had that much evidence sitting around. But, of course, it is, but you have to go and look at it and read it. We're going to try to make it a lot more available because, we've never really had a professional webmaster and website, and that's what we're building right now. And before April 22nd, when we have the world premiere of the film Sirius in Los Angeles, we're going to have all of that information up so that the film will then link into the site, and there will be, because in 2 hours of the film you can only get a little bit of evidence, but then there'll be just, dozens, thousands of bits of information and whatnot in one place as sort of a clearinghouse, and that'll be very exciting. I hope to even have the entire briefing I put together for President Obama in 2009 in there, at least the parts that I'm allowed to put in.
Well, that actually brings up another subject that I was already wanting to ask you. Maybe telepathically you got that.
Yeah.
Or not. It could just be that I'm just taking an opportunity. But I was recently tapped to be in a very, very popular television show, and I will not say which television show. But the production company contacted me, and they handed me a list of questions, and they spoke to me on the phone.
Right.
The focus of the show, because they had seen that I was doing some really intense conspiracy theory type stuff on the Internet, the focus of the show, and they basically came right out and told me in the questions what they wanted. They wanted to take all of this stuff that's going on with people starting to wake up to the things that are going wrong in the world, and they wanted me to blame American presidents for all the problems. They wanted as many specific stories as I could come up with for American presidents causing all the problems in the world. And I had this phone consultation with him, and I said, look, you know, the bottom line is you got oligarchs who have had dynastic financial control. This goes back to the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church. The Rothschilds took over Europe. The Rockefellers took over America. They pooled their resources into the Federal Reserve System. The U.S. dollar was outsourced in 1913. It's lost 96% of its value since then. $26 trillion were paid in bailouts to private banks, many of which were not American, and that's almost half of the global GDP.
Right.
I don't think the problem is the president. And then they said, they called me back 3 days later, or they wrote me back and said, well, the team has decided to go in a different direction.
Yeah. Well, here's one of the problems. Everyone's looking for a scapegoat, and I always tell people, you know, the emperor has no clothes. One of the embarrassing moments, it wasn't an embarrassing moment. It was a poignant moment. And I'm sitting here, and imagine, you know, I'm a 30-some-year-old medical doctor who's flown up to Washington to brief the sitting CIA director at his request on this subject.
Wow.
Just
that's crazy.
Put your mind around that for a moment. And, you know, at the end of the meeting, it was almost a 3-hour meeting, I have a white paper that's in my first book, Extraterrestrial Contact, The Evidence and Implications. And one of the recommendations, there's a set of recommendations for the CIA director and the president of actions that need to be taken dealing with bringing this information out, the technology out, and stopping the secrecy. And the CIA director, Woolsey, looked at me and he said, Dr. Greer, how do we disclose that which we have no access to?
Wow.
Now imagine standing in a room with a sitting CIA director, and the guy was not joking, and he was very emotional about it. And it was one of these things where, you know, the average person thinks that, well, you're the president, you have an all-access pass. But the truth is closer to what Jimmy Carter said not too long ago at a dinner party. I had a friend who was at an event with him who's a classical guitarist, and someone had said, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And President Carter said, well, I don't think I was that man. and someone at the dinner party, I guess there were about 20 people there, said, what do you mean? And President Carter, who actually I just saw at the inauguration here in Washington, he said, look, the fact is there were things I didn't have a high enough clearance to know about. And someone in the room said, oh, things like UFOs, sort of in a ridiculing way.
Right.
And President Carter said, yes, that and more.
Oh.
And you could have, they said you could have heard a pin drop. And so, you know, there's this sort of misunderstanding. And the reason Eisenhower, who had, of course, enormous credibility in the military, he's a 5-star general and a Republican all through, you know, World War II and then president for 2 terms, when he said, beware the military-industrial complex, the big issue, of course, was the fact that the UFO subject and its associated projects within the defense establishment had gotten reorganized under the Rockefeller Commission of 1956, I believe it was, and he had lost complete control over the levers of power on this issue, and he knew it. And we have a witness, a lawyer, Mr. Lubkin, who actually testified to that effect when he was in the Eisenhower White House as a young Army Signal Corps guy, and that's in our disclosure materials, that he was at meetings where Eisenhower was lamenting the fact that, you know, he would get reports about UFO events, but the whole projects dealing with them were out of his control. And he was very angry and very frustrated by it. So people, you know, need to have, I have a lot of actual compassion for some of these folks that I've met with who are at the Pentagon in senior positions. I briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a 3-star general, as well as the head of intelligence for the Joint Staff. And these were men who were very high up in our Defense Department who had inquired about this issue and been denied access, just like the CIA director. So then the question becomes, who's really running this show? Well, it gets back to what you just said, David. It's something that's gotten up and basically subverted democracies around the world, and it runs as its own polity, as its own organizational nexus.
And the oldest power structures are still the most important ones. I mean, Roman Empire, Catholic Church, and, you know, I've heard that the Pope did not resign because he didn't feel good.
Well, there were a lot of problems. I'm going to leave that. I have bigger fish to fry, but I'll just tell you, I will say this. When I've been at the Vatican meeting with very senior people, senior theologians to the Pope and others, and there is widespread support, but not unanimous support, for not only disclosure but peaceful contact. And I love the interview I did some years ago with Monsignor Balducci, who is a senior theologian to Pope John Paul. And he and I spoke very frankly about this. And after I did the interview, which is in Italian, unfortunately, but we're going to try to get a full translation up and out fairly soon. But he turned to me and he said, I couldn't be having this discussion with you unless Papa, meaning the Pope, wanted me to.
Whoa.
And he said some amazing things. Before that, I had some meetings with people with the Vatican's security service and intelligence service because they knew of the briefing that we had put together and then the best available evidence that Lawrence Rockefeller had put together for Bill and Hillary Clinton at the ranch there, the JY Ranch out in the Tetons, that I visited some years ago, and that they really were very interested. In fact, they said, "Would you allow us to have that briefing?" I said, "Of course. I mean, I'm not doing anything secretive at all with this." The same thing I said to the British royal family when they asked for that briefing, which was hand carried by an actor at a premiere some years ago in London to Prince Charles. So I think what people have to understand is that a lot of the conspiracy theory stuff is wrong because it's painted with a very broad brush, and like these folks are trying to get you to say, well, these presidents are all. I'm going, you know what? I'm not saying that they have no say-so over anything, but on some of this stuff, it's so many compartments above anything they're briefed on. And if they are told any of it, David, it's manipulative rubbish designed to get them to do things that the cabal want done. For example, there's a colonel I know who talked about providing alien threat scenarios to Ronald Reagan to get him to support the SDI Star Wars weapon systems in space. And I said, yeah, of course. They're going to say certain things, and it's all manipulative. But the truth is,
and one of my
most of it's deceptive.
One of my insiders told me that Reagan was going to tell the public the truth about UFOs, and then bam, he gets shot.
Right.
So that's one of these things that we're starting to find out. It's like all these historical events have to be reinterpreted.
They all have to be reinterpreted. And, of course, after we provided all this briefing material to the Obama administration upon request, he went to, in his first few months of his term, went and got the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, and that's when that Oslo spiral, the blue spiral, appeared over Oslo, and everyone, of course, it was on CNN and Anderson Cooper and everyone talking about it. And
less than 24 hours before he got the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, and what's interesting is that a week before that happened, there were two separate people who don't know each other from the intelligence community says there's only a few of us on this planet who are going to know what that is. What's going to happen? And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, they said, just wait and see. And then this event happened. And, of course, I know that it was a very human, what's called scalar or longitudinal weapon test fire over Norway. And it was a shot across the bow to scare people. The administration.
I wrote a massive investigation on that called Disclosure Endgame. People can look on my website, divinecosmos.com. And in that investigation, I showed unequivocal evidence that HAARP can be pulsed to make those spirals.
Of course, absolutely.
And you and I talked about this backstage at one of your events, and actually that was the first time I met you. I think it was in Atlanta. And other than the Disclosure Project 2001, that's the first time I reacquainted myself with you. But you had said something to me about how somebody told Obama, whispered in his shoulder, you really wouldn't like it if your plane flew one of those, would you?
He flew into one of these, yeah. Right. And so I think this is, and when Carter was pushing on this and had the White House study group trying to get into the bottom of the UFO issue, there were two people who came into the Oval, the president's private office, that's right off the Oval Office, and said, sir, if you would like to complete your first term as president, you will keep your mouth shut about this. So, this kind of stuff is why. And here's the reason why you and I and everyone listening have to be the people to do. People say, when is disclosure going to happen? I said, we're doing it. And as you point out, as more and more of these movements take on momentum, and we're hoping the film Sirius will really push that momentum, we'll have more and more of these whistleblowers coming forward, and we'll have the ability to bring the science and technology out, because ultimately, if at some point we can prove the energy generation science behind how UFOs are moving and getting here, then it really is game over. But it's not, and it's also the beginning of a new civilization where we don't have to be hooked into the petrodollar linear energy system that's cannibalizing and destroying the planet. And that's really, to be honest with you, people say, why are you doing this film? And I said, I'm doing it because we've got to have a mechanism to raise awareness and also raise the funds to create a professional research and development lab on these new energy issues. It can't be done in an amateur way and in a divided way. It has to be done in a way that's very well organized and well supported. And that's never happened. We'll spend $5 or $6 million. The city of San Francisco spent over $5 million just to have someone study how to get energy from the tide going in and out through the Golden Gate. Well, for that amount of money, we could build a lab and have these scientists bring out several versions of these new energy technologies.
In the 1800s, John Keeley invented a way to use frequencies to dissociate hydrogen and oxygen out of water.
Correct. And, of course, so did Stan Meyer. And
right.
A lot of people don't know that the Stan Meyer stuff really did work. But, of course, he dropped dead and took the secrets to the grave because his patents are full of false information because he was too paranoid. And that's one of the problems with these inventors is that they're always too secretive, and by the time they think they can get it out, something terrible happens. And we've got to learn from this. It's best just to put it out there. That's what we've done with disclosure witnesses
right.
and documents. Same thing with these technologies. You simply, once you get something operational, you put it out there, and you can't worry, if you get into this, like Apple worrying about their iPhone 5 or something, you can't get into this sort of paranoid inventor syndrome because that's going to get you killed, or it's going to result in it being bought out and black shelved. So we've got to learn from this history, and that's why we're doing this film. And by the way, I know we've heard from a lot of people who are still wanting to get into the premiere. We have about 200 seats more that we might be able to release that have been committed to the people who crowdfunded the film. I want to be very clear on this. But we're waiting until a few more days to see if they're going to be able to come. I mean, people donated from South Africa and Australia and New Zealand and Russia, and a lot of those people obviously are entitled to the 2 tickets that their donation for the film entitles them to, but they're probably not coming. But we're waiting to hear an RSVP from them.
Répondez, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, before we release their tickets. So people, if you want to sign up at Sirius Disclosure, SIRIUS, disclosure.com, and you can just put in your email address, and we will send you notifications of where we're doing these premieres. But for the LA premiere, I think we're probably going to be able to release another 200 or so seats, but right now we have to give, the right of first refusal, as it were, to the people who are entitled to those tickets who made the donations to the film. But we know that many of them aren't going to be able to come. But it is April 22nd at LA Live, and we're probably going to be doing one in Washington, D.C., the week of the mock congressional hearings that Bassett and his group are doing, and then we're going to have one here in Charlottesville, Virginia, near the University of Virginia, and we hope to have a premiere in outside London or in London this summer. So stay tuned about that. And everyone, I really want people to visualize this, that everyone listening who's concerned about these new energy issues, the future of the world, higher consciousness, and our new civilization, you can all become a distributor of this film by signing up. We're going to be, if you sign up at our site, we'll send you a link that the Video on Demand group is setting up, where every single person, say you've got 200 people on your email list, you can become a distributor to those people. And this is how we'll turn it into something viral that just keeps going around the world over and over.
Right.
And David, I'd invite you to do the same, because this would be a fantastic, and if you have a pet charity you want to donate the funds to, or if you just want to put the funds back into the new energy lab we're proposing to build, you can do it either way. And I think this is how we can really build a momentum where we don't have to go to corporations, government, or even just rich individuals to fund this energy work, but it's done by the people, for the people, and will be, just like the film will be distributed by the people, the funding for this new energy research needs to be done by the people in a way that it can't be taken down by one big funder or one corporation. So this is the very viral new media model that we're wanting to experiment with, and all of you who are listening who want to be part of it, I appreciate your help in networking and making that happen.
Stephen, I also want to point out that something you said back in the 90s when I was just a fan on the internet, just like everybody else wanting to learn about this stuff, you had said publicity is protection. And it seemed such an oxymoron at first. What the hell is he talking about? If you go public, you're safe. But the thing people have to understand is that it's the strength in numbers that actually protect us, not being afraid that if you donate money or if you get involved that somebody's going to come after you. It's just the opposite.
Correct. And that's what we did with disclosure, and that's what we've done with everything we've done with contact. Now we have thousands of people on CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind contact teams, and you can see a world map. There's a link from our site to that, and you can become this team, part of this team. By the way, all the contact, the meditation protocols, the electronic tones that we send out over radio waves to the ETs, the whole protocol is now on an Android app and an iPhone app that you can get, and it's linked from our store, and there have been thousands of people doing it. We recently got a report from a truck driver in Eastern Europe who was practicing these protocols, and an ET craft came right over his truck, and he stopped and had this amazing contact experience.
Oh my God.
So this is happening worldwide because that's the power of consciousness, and as you know, David, the whole morphogenic fields of a conscious, a super consciousness that is really what our individualities are linked into all the time, whether we're aware of it or not.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, this has been a wild ride. Thank you for bringing me on your show. I'm
thank you,
always
David.
amazed to hear your stories. It's like you are the only guy that's done all this stuff out there, and you really blazed the trail for the rest of us, and I might add that you did it during an era where the hate was much worse. So I think you encountered a lot more BS than people after you had to, because now it's becoming more socially acceptable. But back in the day you were doing this, I mean, people either loved you or they hated you, but
right.
Either extreme.
Right. Well, some things never change, but I do appreciate, David, you being on the show, and let's do it again. And I look forward to seeing you and everyone else at the premiere in Los Angeles on Earth Day, April 22nd, 2000.
Sounds like a wild party. 800 people? I'm there.
Yeah, and there's going to be an awesome after party we're going to have nearby at LA Live, and it's just going to be amazing. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So thank you. Well, okay. Well, I think our time is pretty much up. I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks. And until next time, keep looking up, and God bless.